Recording. There we go. So let's go through the remotely conducted script that is provided for us. So we're using Zoom today for this meeting, which will allow, I'm going to do this like a television commercial, okay? With the fine print. So we're using Zoom for this meeting, which allows for the public to participate in the meeting as an attendee. The chair can request the members of the public provide their names for purposes of keeping accurate records of the meeting. Attendees must register to participate. The registration link is unique to the meeting. The registration link can be found in the description of Nantucket Government TV YouTube. Attendees will be in listening mode. They can click the raise hand button if they wish to speak, or just flail your hands wildly. The chair will call on those who have got their hands raised. All questions are to be identified through the chair. As a preliminary matter, this is Barry Rector, chair of the Cannabis Advisory Committee. Please let me confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Abby D. Molina.
Here, yes, I, all things.
Jacques Samicki. Okay, Joe Plandowski.
Here.
The chair is here, and there is no staff, and anticipated speakers would be Dan Berger.
Dan Berger, present. Here.
Okay.
I as well, all of the above.
All right, all the above. And Dawn may join us. I don't know what her current status is. I think that would be about everyone who's going to show up. So good afternoon, everyone. This open meeting of the Cannabis Advisory Committee is conducted remotely pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2023. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment. For this meeting, we are convening by video conference via Zoom, as posted on the town's website. Like I said, please be aware that this meeting is being recorded and that all attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you and to take care not to screen share your computer. Anything you broadcast may be captured by this recording. Thank God my collar is now straight. All supporting materials that have been provided, members of this body, are available on the town's website. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless I note otherwise. We're going to turn to the first item on the agenda. Before we do so, permit me to cover ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. If they conclude the remarks, we'll go down the line of members, inviting each of you to provide comments, questions, motions. Please hold until I call on you. If you have a phone or additional computer running in the background, just please make sure you mute that. If you're speaking, please remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any responses, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in a conversation with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. For items with public comment, we're going to skip over that. Each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. That probably just took up the entire meeting, so a motion to adjourn would be acceptable at this point. God, is that a long thing? Holy Christmas. Okay, so let me just move some screens around here. Open that up. Make sure no one's hanging out there in the wings. We are good to go. So I would love someone, you have the agenda, and I'd love someone to make a motion to approve the agenda. Mr. Plandowski, do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you, Abby. All those in favor, Jacques Mickey?
Aye. Yes.
Thank you, Joe Plandowski.
Yes.
Abby D. Molina.
Aye.
And the chair votes affirmative as well, too. There are no draft minutes at this point. There is no public comment unless Dan wants to. No, he's gonna chime in at a different juncture here. The election of officers, one day we will actually have a quorum at this point. If anyone ever gets the burning sense they want to do this, just let me know. So where that's going to bring us into I'm just thinking for a second. We'll just go through this. So let's talk about potential citizens warrant articles coming up for next April, May of next year, when that'll bring us in. I think that's going to be ATM 25 that we'll be at. That'll be coming up. So that'll probably be around April, May. But Dan and I have been talking a bit. He's expressed some interest about possibly bringing forward some citizen warrant articles. I have, given the nature of what he wants to do at this point, and with the next few topics on the agenda, I think you'll see why we want to progress to this really being citizen warrant articles with things. So without further ado, Dan, I'm going to turn things over to you and see what y'all got to say. Please. Oh, hold on, Joe.
Must it go to the town meeting? Whatever's being requested, must it go to the town meeting, or can it just be done by the select board?
I think when you hear his, I don't know if the two of you have talked, I gather you
Yes,
probably
yes.
have. We can kind of distinguish where that's at, but the next, I'm going to foreshadow here a little bit. The next few topics on the agenda are really going to dial us back into why I'm encouraging him for anything that is regulatory in nature or would directly affect either our bylaws, either in zoning with the definitions, or in I think it's chapter 95, which is all the cannabis related things. You'll see again why we're going to head into that direction. Let's see where this goes, and if you think there's something that doesn't require something to happen here at this point, but you're not getting the whole picture here at the moment. Dan, do you mind if I take a few moments? I really do want to skip into this because this is coming up a little bit. So did you all get a chance to review the proposed changes by the Cannabis Control Commission?
Yes.
It was a lengthy document. Okay, you got a chance to look at that. All right. And then shortly thereafter, the Mass Municipal Association sponsored a webinar on those draft regulations, which have been moved from draft into accepted regulations now. Did y'all get a chance to watch that? Because that was really telltale. Okay. So you're going to hear my opinion. I don't know what you've walked away with at this point, but the changes that the Cannabis Control Commission were pretty broad sweeping and actually changed things to where in the past the town had the upper hand with things. They were the favored party here. And a lot of the cannabis industries were meant to have to, kowtow to and follow the regulations of what was being done by each separate town. Some of the towns, I'll be upfront at this point, were very onerous in terms of what they were levying against certain people who wanted to open the cannabis industry. Mind you, when all this took place, which was over 5 years ago, no one really understood what was going on, and the social stigma of cannabis was running high. And everyone felt as though that because of that social stigma that was there and the newness of it, they could extract whatever tools they felt necessary. Time has moved on. And I think where we're at today and how the public views cannabis is a far different cry from where we were when everything first started. Cannabis Control Commission's been through changes as well too, but I think they began to recognize what had transpired over those 5 years and what may continue to transpire as time moved along. So again, my own opinion, I believe they wanted to try to level the playing field. Well, not only did they level the playing field, the pendulum swung into the other direction, which is now very favorable toward anyone in the cannabis industry. You all had a chance to look at the social equity policy that was there, and that should begin to tell you something about what, changes are going to are already starting to take place and what they mean. So I'll be upfront, and I can't express this any other way, and God forgive me if it offends anyone. Um, a lot of towns, a lot of cities are viewing that the Cannabis Control Commission has taken a very adversarial relationship with them. Everything seems to be favoring, or a good deal of things seem to be favoring the industry. So there is a lot of the cities and towns are meeting with their own lawyers at this point to try to figure out what the next stage is with things. No one's, the cannabis industry is like, yay, thank God, it's about time. And the towns or cities are like, well, we had our heyday. What the heck just happened? And how dare they? And we need to push back. I have to admit, even on my own opinion, even reading through some of the stuff, some of the requirements I thought were even a little bit onerous upon a city or town to do something. There are other things I was pleasantly surprised to see in there as well too. But the problem here at the moment is that this is brand spanking new. This only occurred within the past 2 months or so. People have been aware of it, but all of a sudden the regulations were like, boom, they're enacted. We're rolling ahead. And truthfully, I have no feel of where we are at the moment with the town of Nantucket and its handholding relationship with anything cannabis related. I do want to try to schedule a meeting with the town administrator just to initially kind of do a one-on-one and understand what some of the positions are and maybe bring some clarity to things. And then as a group, we're going to circle back in and understand what those positions are that the town wants to take. I don't have a good feel for it at the moment. I really don't. What will go hand in hand with this as well too is not just what has been put in place by the cannabis committee, cannabis control committee, but also what we've put in place for chapter 95, as well as the zoning stuff, which again begins to define certain things, not only the definitions, but where it can be located as well too. So that's going to be a conversation with Leslie Woodson Snell, who's the current director of planning. And I've got that on tap just to begin to get a sense of where we are. And then we'll circle back and see where that begins to bring us to. All right. That's a lot to digest. But if you've all walked away and everything I've pretty much said resonates, and I think you can see why we're moving down this avenue of seeing what Dan wants to do, understanding that maybe the best way to approach this until we have a firmer sense of what the position is of the select board and town administration, that we basically work for them as this advisory committee. So we need to all kind of be on that same page before we can go charging ahead. Otherwise, I'm afraid it may turn into a very adversarial relationship between this board and town administration. I don't think any of us want that. Not unless we really have to, but a meeting of the minds is I think very necessary here. Does that help a little bit? Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
I was going to ask, do you have a sense of what the folks that live on Nantucket think of marijuana?
I think we all have a little bit of a sense of that. I see Dan smiling like a Cheshire cat there at this point. I would dare say where we were when things first started opening, the first place being the Green Lady, and where we are today. I think people are generally a lot more comfortable with it. I know not everyone's going to be on board with this. Town meeting may be a little bit of a tougher read because we know town meeting too has this propensity of stacking things, you know,
Yes.
on, and that makes it very difficult to read sometimes. But you can all challenge me. My own personal take is, I think there's enough confidence there to where we can begin to bravely test the waters and see where we're at. But like I said, until until there's this meeting of the minds with administration, I'm going to have a little bit of a tough time reading it. But I think people wise, you tell me. You tell me. I'm going to throttle back here for a few moments. You've heard my say, and if you've got a better feel for things, please. Abby, your hand's raised. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think my sense, Barry, I think you're right on. I think from a public standpoint, as you mentioned, I think a lot of the stigma has really waned over the last few years. But I think that from like the community, I think like it's anything else, it's like the stigma of whether or not, I personally think there's a lot of people who do use it. But I think it's like anything else that people want it to be done responsibly and, like just like when we think about bars and different activities. And so I think the more that we are kind of like thoughtful and mindful of safety and like if people are going to do it, have like safeguards and things in place, I think that would, in terms of like the community, go a long way, because I don't think we would get to a point where people aren't going to use it. And I think like anything else, we don't want, if people are using it, we don't want them to be doing it in an unsafe way when there are other options. And so like when I think about what like Dan has talked about with like a if there was like a cannabis cafe, things like that, I think that people's concerns will be similar to anything, is like really the safety, regulation, typical things. And so I think the more that we're thoughtful about those things is the more that people will then see the value in like our commission and like how we are being mindful that there also are going to be people, just like there are people who don't drink. Like, we have a large addiction recovery community on the island who won't be partaking either. But as long as we're mindful and thoughtful of those people and ensuring they have voices and are part of the process, I think that that's probably like the most important part, is really just being thoughtful, being mindful, including people in conversations, discussions, being respectful of differing opinions. I know sometimes in this political environment that doesn't always happen, but I think luckily in Nantucket, because we are a smaller community, a lot of people are, or at least try to be respectful, even if it's not necessarily what they personally believe or not. I mean, I'll say personally, I don't really use marijuana at all. But at the same time, I want to ensure that people who do are doing it in like a healthy, way that is safe for everybody. So I think that that's at least like the way that I would look at it. You know what I mean? So I don't know. That was just my 2 cents that I wanted to add.
Yeah. All right. So let me go to Joe and then I'll go to Jock, because I really do want to hear from all of you. Go ahead, Joe.
The issue with the town meeting that always bothers me is 10% of the voters show up to make the decision. So you get 800 people in there making the decision, and it's not always the way you think it might go. And the really good example from last year was the topless issue. I mean, I just found it hard to believe how overwhelming the vote was for that, doing that. I just did not expect it. And I think about marijuana, it's a crapshoot. I mean, I have no idea what the thing would look like. I don't have any sense at all of which way that vote might go. And the problem you run into is there's a lot of work that goes into getting this warrant put together. And then you're out for another year hoping to come back and get something else done.
I would agree that I don't necessarily think legislating by town meeting should be the ideal path we go to, because exactly what you're saying, Joe, small subsegment of the population, and your example is perfect one. And it's a lot of times like the loudest voice, because I personally, with the topless issue, and I guess I get to say this being the only woman here, I personally found it kind of insulting how it was positioned as like, oh, this is a women's rights issue. Because
Yes, yes.
being a woman, I would say that was never going to be my top issue as a woman and women's rights. Like, it's not about whether or not I can go topless at a beach. Like, I can tell you that straight up. Like, that's not what women's rights is about in my mind. And so I kind of found that positioning insulting, because I felt like personally, if I had wanted to go topless to a beach in Nantucket prior to that, I felt like there was a safe venue for people to do that. So I felt like, to your point, it was very much like a manipulated situation. And so I would agree that I think if the more we can try to like not legislate through town meeting, I would think that that's probably more effective, because I agree that I don't necessarily think it's representative of the town or even all of the viewpoints. A lot of times it's the loudest voices. And Barry, obviously, Barry and I have been through some situations in town meeting where similar things have happened. So, I think that we should work as much as we can to incorporate everyone from the community, but in, like I said, like respectful forums. And I wouldn't necessarily say town meeting is probably the most respectful forum where we see people just.
That's why I was asking the question of whether we can avoid the town meeting, because that's
Good question.
dangerous.
I
All right.
think Dan will address that when he talks, right, Dan?
So
Hey,
let
Jacques,
me,
I went in before you got to go.
let me turn it over to Jacques for a few minutes and get some feedback from him, if you'd be so kind. Up to you.
Thanks. Couple things on related subjects. Did HB 107 get passed? 108? They dealt in a major way with cannabis with all the prior legislation. One capping if the towns didn't want to do all the accounting and stuff like that, they could just do a 1% fee on all the gross stuff, and then
Mhm.
forget out of a lot of the requirements. And other HB 108 was I might get this wrong, but I believe it was preserving the status quo on your contracts with the town if your gross receipts, what you'd paid for the last 5 years was less than 3%.
Mhm.
Uh, and that would allow the town to keep the community agreement, the prior community agreement, rather than having to go back and redo everything. But given that, 107 makes sense because
Mhm.
as it stands now, a lot of stuff is very onerous as far as bookkeeping and stuff like that. So I can see a lot of towns might just go, let's just do the 1% tax and that's it, and get out of all these requirements. The 108 is not really, I wouldn't be a big supporter of 108, just in the case that, I mean, I've always been for bringing marijuana on parity with alcohol as far as taxing the way it's regulated. Uh, and what the Cannabis Control Commission did, it would go a long ways to doing that, as it current stands with their existing or their proposed existing framework for these new laws. So it seems to me July 1st next year is a drop dead date on a couple things. Is that correct? Anybody know that?
I don't quite have all the administrative timeframes in place right now. I'm sorry.
I believe it's
Yeah,
May.
Yeah, that resonates with me. I think it might be May.
yeah. The May was the first thing, but they later gave a July 1st date for all the current legislation, and what you had to do. That was the date by which you started have to doing it by.
Yeah.
for when you're doing agreements.
Right. And I don't know if things have changed recently, but November was also a date that stands out in my mind as well too, where certain new legislation was coming into play. So
Yeah.
there's a lot to digest there. Um,
Yeah, the KMP webinar
mhm.
covered these topics. That's where I picked up all those topics
Okay, yeah.
was that. Okay, had my say. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. So just one more thing to dial back to the public here is that um two things made me realize that the social stigma was starting to wear off. Actually, three things. One is my dentist happens to be right on the same property as Gray Lady. Um, and just to sit there for a bit and watch people going in and out was kind of like there's constant foot traffic. So that tells me something. Um, the second thing I picked up from both of the people at AC Natural and Gray Lady, Green Lady, was that their summer was incredibly busy. So that says something. No surprise. The third thing was my own personal experience before I left the pharmacy with something that came on board just at about the same time, CBD. And CBD had that stigma of like, oh, CBD is cannabis. What are you trying to do? Get me high? But when with just talking to people about it, um, that stigma would fall away very rapidly because a lot of the people were using it saw that they needed to bring something into their life that wasn't being addressed through the standard pharmacy products that were out there, be it prescription or over the counter. They wanted something new to try. And so I found that I was getting an increased customer base from it, and the feedback was really good, especially if you educated them the right way. So those are all kind of things that at least bias my opinion about where we're at. So Joe, go ahead.
But I would ask, when did you see your dentist? Was it in the summertime when the summer crowd was here?
Yep. And I also see him in the winter as well too. We have standing appointments.
Okay, because I was wondering whether it was slanted to the visitors
I agree.
versus the on island folks.
There's I'm gonna be ginger here at this point. There's a lot of people traveling over those doorways that were like, oh, well, that's interesting. And I'm gonna leave it at that. But it was definitely a matter of a little surprise, and it was okay. I mean, it was like good for them. They're willing to, they're going to try something different. Big deal. But I guess I was a little, again, just I was surprised. All right, let me kind of stop here. Dan, you've been very patient with us at this point, and we kind of went off of we actually covered most of what was on the agenda. But I think it was necessary to, and thank you for the latitude. It was necessary, I think, to call a lot of that into play, to know kind of where we're at, what's going on, and what's transacting in the process. So let me give you some time. Floor is yours, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you, Barry. I appreciate it. And yeah, I do appreciate actually the conversation, because I think that's where there's been a lot of behind the scenes stuff happening on my end as well as on the town's end around all of this stuff. But, especially with the regulatory changes, that has changed the atmosphere, and it is a lot of stuff to wrap our heads around. But I'm going to stick to my agenda items because, I think that will address a lot of the stuff that we talked about as well. And I know the last agenda item, which is the municipal equity policy, also might illuminate some things for everybody by the end of it. But, to start, before I share my screen here, Barry, I think, was wise in putting me on the agenda as annual town meeting 25. I've been motivated to get this done for annual town meeting 24 for sure. But from the outset, I wanted to get all of these changes in front of all parties involved, and as many community members as possible so that we could get that input. And I think you all, really, truly having experienced those annual town meetings, you hit the nail on the head as far as, is that the most meaningful or successful path that we could take? So, with that being said, there are a couple things that I'll address in my presentation that we might, you all might be able to, you have some latitude internally that you might be able to make some changes without having to get this at the annual town meeting. But Barry, is it all right if I share my screen?
Go ahead. I just opened it up for you.
Awesome. All right. I'm going to share this. Yeah, let's go over here. So, and I do appreciate it as well. Informal dialogue for sure. And that's where I think there's power in me sort of approaching this as a private citizen, really, where, I've been able to spin my wheels on my end and sort of do some outreach and stuff. But I've been trying to reach out to stakeholders on the island as well. And I've been getting some really positive feedback. And just to give you sort of my gauge, as far as, the people I'm reaching out to are definitely involved in the cannabis space in one way or another, potentially. But all of the folks I'm talking to about these changes, they're excited about, the prospects of what the regulatory changes are bringing as far as social consumption goes, and, all of that. And, I told Barry as well, this is really, town meeting and me doing this too. This is me trying to test the waters to an extent too. I want to get this in front of folks, and this may be one of the easier ways to get some of that feedback. But yeah, I'll get into this for sure. So I tried to group this as sort of maybe least complex to most complex. And, when it came to zoning too, I told Barry right off the bat too, that's maybe, where I'm least comfortable and where I think, as far as feedback from the town, that would definitely, I think, be beneficial. But I know, and from my research, it sounded like there was some consensus work done back in 2019. So Barry actually bounced me some of these zones. So when we get to that, we'll get to that. But basically, I folded in some feedback from Barry, from some other folks on the island, some people in the former commissioners, actually, in the Cannabis Control Commission, who shall remain nameless. But so with all that being said, I'll get right into this. This is something, this first one is something we touched on back with the draft equity policy. And this is one I think by the end of the meeting, we might get some more clarity on as well. But basically, I broke this one down. This is a change that would have to take place to section 95-7 to incorporate the waiver process. There is some language as well in the definition of marijuana establishment that may have needed to get changed, some changes done, but it points actually to the section in the statute in 94G. So that's covered. So this is essentially a pretty cut and dry, simple fix. It would just add a couple changes there. And I will yield to the floor if anyone has, yield my time. If anyone has any questions on this one too, definitely just stop me and I'll happily, but I feel like we'll be talking about this a little later on for sure. This is another one that, and I drafted this one over the last 24 hours. I had a couple calls with some of the members, and I want to try to meet with everyone one-on-one, but this is something that's come up over the last 6 months in some of the meetings, and it sounds like there is maybe some momentum to potentially look at this cap. I figured I just, I've been dialed in on this, so I figured I'd just throw this up there. This is one I'm not even necessarily married to. I am looking at other license types myself. And, we've talked about it in the meeting. Is there even necessarily the space for more licenses per se? And, as far as municipal equity goes, there are other license types that, the town can, once those maybe come online, that will meet these equity policies and sort of that, those statutory requirements that are coming out. But I picked 50% just as sort of maybe a logical, and that's where, having done my research, I know when a lot of these were drafted back in 2018, the intention was to sort of lay a ground floor and give the space to grow organically. So, I'm not one to say this is the right number necessarily. I don't even know. You know, I figured I'd put this out there and maybe helps everybody out. But this is, yeah, you know, one thing that has come up over the last few months. This brings me to sort of, this is the big one, but you know, back in the meeting in June, not much has changed from there. This is really the crux of what I was bringing to the town initially, were these changes to section 139-2A, item 74, and removing 139-2A, item 3. And essentially what this does, it just lumps all adult use marijuana license types into one definition, the marijuana establishment definition, and it also addresses some buffer zone requirements and co-location of adult use license types. So the next slide sort of breaks it all down, and definitely stop me. This is sort of, you know, one of the more complex ones. Here, I'll hide that one. Maybe that'll help. But yeah, you know, essentially, and this is one that I've really done a lot of legwork on, and it has evolved over the months even, but you know, I think this is a pretty clean way to potentially just lump all adult use license types into one license type or into one definition. And, you know, removing one, this is you know, a big one that I've heard some feedback on for sure, and maybe a little, you know, may require more feedback, but really, so recreation, removing this line item 1, it allows adult use license types to be co-located with other uses. So essentially, even so, imagine a cultivator wants to come online on the island, and they also want to get a complementary production license. So as it stands, these would have to be 2,000 feet away from each other because they're adult use license types. They would have to be in their own standalone facilities, and you know, really this would allow to there. And you know, there are some non-plant touching license types, you know, the marijuana courier license, which is the one that you know, I'm sort of trying, one of the licenses I'm trying to bring online on the island. And this would allow, you know, a lot more flexibility, and you know, and especially on Nantucket, we know real estate is the #1 commodity. Space is the #1 commodity. And, you know, Barry and I, we touched on this as well. Affordable housing, employee housing, you know, essentially if, as this would stand, you know, say that there's a property that has, you know, an apartment above the garage or something like that, we would have to leave that, you know, or any potential licensee would have to leave that vacant because they can't be co-located with those use types. So, and, you know, getting in the weeds a bit on that one, but I think that one is definitely important. And for me, as someone who's a potential licensee, it would definitely help out. You know, and number 2, this one is sort of just, you know, and stop me anytime if anyone has any questions there. But number 2 is also pretty straightforward. This just points to the definition of the buffer zone from the state regulations. So I actually have it pulled up here, and this is relevant to me because I actually had to deal with this because my establishment up here in Salem, Massachusetts, by the old definition, we are within 500 feet of a school, actually. So this new buffer zone definition, and you know, it basically, it is the closest accessible entrance now that you are measuring from to closest accessible entrance. And if there are impassable barriers, so for instance, I'm actually inside of a building with co-located, I have neighbors, it's a large industrial complex here. So since we're actually inside, we were able to measure, yeah, and I'm butchering this maybe, but we were able to measure with the impassable barrier definition lumped in there. So this, I think, and that's where I've spoken to some folks actually who have property on the island that's already zoned, you know, appropriately and out of some buffer zones, but because, you know, and honestly, this doesn't even necessarily have to take place. Salem, for instance, they have their old definition still in place, and, you know, the state statute takes precedence, but, you know, I figured just having some language there to point people to that definition might be helpful too. And again, stop me anytime, please. And, but number 3, this was one that actually, and I think in, you know, my initial proposals, I left intact, but having done a lot of outreach now on, properties that are zoned appropriately and outside of this buffer zone, there are really only a few pockets of the island you can operate in the commercial, industrial, or commercial neighborhood zone with the 2,000-foot buffer, in place. And again, I point this back to, my points from item 1, where, except we're co-located, and the only licenses that are allowed to be co-located are adult use marijuana retailers and medical treatment centers. Unless you have those two license types, you would have to be 2,000 feet away from each other if you were holding more than one license type. And this brings me to another potentially, and I know this might be slightly polarizing, but this is really where, when I was looking at this, I was taking this from sort of where, the non-plant touching license types. So a recreational, line 7 reads, a recreational marijuana establishment shall not be eligible for qualification as a home occupation. So for instance, with the marijuana courier license, and I'm looking at a marijuana transporter license as well, those two are, well, marijuana transporter you can actually store on site, so I'll shelve that one. Marijuana courier actually is a non-plant touching license type, essentially, because you are fulfilling deliveries for brick and mortar dispensaries. So you're not actually storing any product on site. You are going to those facilities to get the orders that need to be fulfilled that day, dispatching from there, etc. So really, if a marijuana courier license were on, and I mentioned it back in June, really, I'd just be looking for a home office where I could store some servers and do some dispatch work. But, as it stands, if I happen to get an apartment or a home out there, I wouldn't be able to house that even if it were zoned appropriately. So I think that's just something to maybe look out to give some more flexibility for other license types. And, again, on this note too, I know that there's a push, and one of the reasons the committee was formed was to help promote craft co-ops as well. So, say that, there's a farm out there that has someone's home on site, and it's there are quite a few out there as far as I'm aware. As of now, because that, the home or the dwelling is on the same lot, I don't think by, that definition, folks could operate that. So removing that would help sort of expand that a bit. And again, please stop me anytime. I told Barry, and I've told everyone, I think at this point, I got a head full of steam, so just point me in the right direction.
Can I ask
Dan,
a question?
I want to
Please.
stop here. Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
The question I have is, what's the problem with co-location? Why is there a barrier to having co-location? So what if one store is located next to the other?
And that's, yeah.
Go ahead.
No,
Okay.
and that's where I think through the Barry, you may be able to illuminate this better than I would, but from my research and everything, it seemed like there was just concern of oversaturation and maybe, the island getting packed with licenses. But I think we've seen now too that I don't think that's really that it's not feasible. And the only way that the island, the island's cannabis industry is going to grow is if it grows organically with the town as it is, and that's working with the existing agricultural operators and, the legacy farmers out there. And that's where, I get where, and you watch those meetings back in 2018, a lot of the concern really was about, lines around the block and people buying up entire blocks that, and luckily that hasn't happened. So, and I don't think it will, especially when we talked about it, Barry, right? 0.2 acres sells for $2 million on the island now. That's where I think, it's a different market than it was 5 years ago. But, and Barry, correct me if I'm wrong, please.
I don't think so. I would probably dare say to you, this again was treating this thing like the Wild West, where they were afraid there was going to be a gun shop on every corner. There was a fear that there was going to be a marijuana shop on every corner, especially in places like in the ROH district downtown. So I think this was put in place to do that. Whether that would be completely abolished or whether that minimum separation can drop to something different, we're just going to have to see where it goes. But Joe has sent us a lot of good information at times about the industry, and that the perception of where it was 5 years ago, where it was like, oh my God, everyone should get on board, everyone should own one, blah, 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 blah. The economic realities today broadcast a very, very different story. And so it's like I said, time I think is working in favor of the industry here. And I don't think nowadays that would be as major an issue, but
I do have another follow-on question, and that
Yeah.
is at 50%, that would say there would be, I believe, 10. I think there are 20 liquor
you're right.
licenses.
Yeah.
That would say 10 outlets.
I-
I don't
Again,
I don't see that happening. And that might scare a lot of locals, saying 10 outlets? You got to be kidding me.
I hear that. Go ahead, Jock. I don't want to predominate. Go ahead.
I've got a question about just where we stand now with that, because my understanding is that if indeed I wanted to run a courier service, that would take up one of those 3 licenses that we have available.
No, I was kind of surprised by this. The license are attached to an actual place that would be selling cannabis.
Okay.
Whereas the delivery aspect and stuff like that are not tied into that.
Okay.
So what stopped it was what was it there? God, what was it? 130 chapter 139 2A 74. That long, there you go. That's it. That's it. That's where everything kind of came to a grinding halt for anything that wasn't directly an adult cannabis distributor. That was it. So those two things, both in terms of delivery and in terms of home occupation. What's the third one? I'm blanking here. Those kind of said, no, for this town, that wasn't going to happen. But remember, when all this is crafted, this is all happening at the same time before even the first marijuana establishment takes place out here. And very few people across the state even knew what this was going to look like. And there was a lot of fear generated things that caused a lot of these bylaws and stuff to take place. So I'm not going to repeat myself, but I think you know where we're at with this. But I think it's time to broach some of these issues. Go ahead, John.
So the only, when we're talking about the 50% of the 10 licenses that are being proposed, those are really earmarked to people that have retail establishments. All the other type licenses are not included under that number at all. That's what actually, that's what I think you said. I just wanted to.
Yeah, I think the only thing I might be a little questionable on is like the social consumption type thing, whether that would fall under this category.
Cafes.
You know, exactly. But I think as time has moved along, there'll be other ways to address like a cafe, more under zoning and less under the marijuana aspect of things. You're going to excuse me for a minute, but carry on. Go ahead, Dan.
No problem. Yes, and through the chair and on the limitations on licenses. So I hold a delivery license up in Salem, and it is defined by the state as a non-retail license. So this cap right now of the 20%, it only points towards the adult use marijuana retailer license. And as far as social consumption goes, to Barry's point there, it is not, the regulations for social consumption are not promulgated yet. So it still will remain to be seen if the state is going to define that as a retail license type, With that being said, though, they're looking at a number of different social consumption license types. Some may have a retail element, some may be, pop-up event license types, some may be mobile, tour bus type things. So there's going to be a number of different things. Some may have that on-site sale element, and that may fall under this cap. But as of now, they just actually had their meeting for social consumption, the first meeting on Monday this week. And it sounds like the next batch of regulatory updates are going to be around social consumption and delivery. So they're looking at a number of provisions around the delivery licenses, hoping to make them a bit more robust. And then they're going to start building out that framework for social consumption. And I believe they may be looking at vertical integration for adult use license types and or vertical integration on the medical side, where they may de-verticalize, or whatever the word will be for that. So there's a number of things still happening. And then Jacques, to your point, the bills you're talking about, I think if we're going to see more changes, if that pendulum's going to swing another way, it's going to be legislative changes now, because Chapter 180 that passed last year, that's what led to a lot of the changes to 94G Section 3. So now the regulations they're promulgating, those are just living up to the statute and the legislative changes. So they're just living up to that statute. But I digress. And and this is where Barry, I joked with him. I left him a voicemail, I think on Monday. And, I'm like, you're basically getting a stream of consciousness journal from me. It's like, as soon as I absorb or retain some new regulatory change or some change, I bounce it to Barry, and I'm just, try to clue him in. But, and as far as this goes on the limitations of licenses, because we did briefly touch on this over the last few months, but again, I am not necessarily married to this. 10 is a large number. That will drastically change the landscape on the island for sure. And I think, that's where this one, I'm not, I'm open to suggestions on this. And that's where annual town meeting 24 or 25 or whatever that looks like, this is one I think we need to chew on, as well as zoning. So I definitely, I yield to the town on this. But, and Barry, I'm glad you're back, because I think, these next 2 points on this one, these are sort of the big ones too. And this addresses,
Okay.
I think, yeah. So, and this is to Abby's point. When Abby and Joe, you were both asking if there were changes that could be made without getting this before the town meeting. This is the one. This is number 8, is dealing with social consumption licenses now. So part of the changes from Chapter 180 last year were, the legislature gave citizens, but also municipalities, the ability to enact social consumption regulations. So social consumption specifically, they specified that you do not have to get these changes before the voters. And I'll point to, it's Chapter 94G, Section 3, local control. And it's one of the subsections in there. But also, so on this note, and I told Barry, I'm like, on social consumption, you can cut me out of the equation entirely. But no, social consumption, the town does have the power to enact these changes on their own. And that's where I think, right now, we have a lot of opportunity, because the state, they're beginning their discussions on social consumption. Monday was that first meeting. And yeah, we can hit the ground running. And I think Nantucket too, and we see it with the testing, caveats that were carved. I think the island, we can really make a case where, if there are specific provisions Nantucket wants to see in social consumption, or specific things that you might want to get carved out for the island, now's the time to get this going. But, and on this note, I'm ready to get this going for the annual town meeting, but I'm the first person to call, I guess, the Secretary of the Commonwealth election division with the changes to Chapter 180 last year. Since November last year, there actually has been a petition that the election division was going to make available, or needed to make available, to get social consumption on the next biennial election.
Mhm.
And to get that done, you need 10% of the voters who voted at the last biennial election to sign. So, and I, told Barry on this too, and this is where I agree, really I'd say this is just testing the waters to an extent, but, over the next year, up till next November, I think, if the town wants to enact their own policies, but, whatever the support there is, I have pulled a petition to get social consumption going on Nantucket. And I've bounced that to a few people. And I think that's where I think we all sort of touched on that. As far as success goes, and as far as, getting that in front of a larger pool of folks, that's a good avenue to take. And I think from my research too, just to also gauge the temperature on Nantucket, question 4, when it passed, I believe it was 60% of the voters on the island voted in favor. So that was, I think, 6% points higher than the average than the entire state. So I think, the town may want to see this get going, but Barry, it looks like, yeah, you have unmuted yourself. So I will yield to you on this one.
I don't know. Do you have any questions so far, anyone? Here's the thing too. It will be how, sadly, because everything that we're touching on here is all town bylaws at the moment. This is why we've got to go to town meeting to change it. There's nothing here that we, as much as we'd like to, we really cannot change it on our own unless the state legislature specifically states that it eclipses or overwrites any other bylaws that may be locally administered. It's the only way you're going to get, so unless that happens on the state level, you're forced to have to go back in and look at what your town, specific town or city has done, and then make a determination from there whether what you need to do to be able to follow what's going to happen. But like I said, initially a lot of this stuff was put in place because of the initial stigma of things. But today you may find that I don't think this would definitely fly in either the Sconset Old Historic or the Downtown Historic District about doing social consumption. Not right now, at least. Maybe 5 more years from now, but the first one could maybe function on Old South Road somewhere. That's the new, that really is the new commercial corridor that's out there. So how you just, it'd be one of those things too, that if it does come up, it's a question of how does it get pitched as well. Because sometimes, the last thing you want to do is just kind of throw it out there and then let people run off on their own accord saying, oh my God, there's going to be all types of potheads downtown on Main Street, and they're going to be walking out with their chicken infused THC and then, wind up giving it to some. Yeah, it's that level of craziness. But I think if you dial in the right way, it stands a much higher chance of success. And this is why it's going to be important to kind of address it through what areas that would definitely fly under with zoning. You don't want to necessarily relegate something like that into the industrial district. You could with the right feel maybe, but it's like I said, there I do see at least from a zoning perspective, I see places for it that it may be viable. But anyways, Joe.
How about Cisco Brewery?
Possibly, but I'm not sure what's out there. A lot of that's tied into agriculture. Okay, so the whole idea of the agricultural thing, we maybe want to let me touch on that for a second because lately I've had an insight into that. Some of the agricultural facilities here on the island may not want to go near cannabis for a very simple set of reasons. State and federal grants and funding. Okay. Same exact reason why the pharmacy industry never got into it. Same exact reason why transport of materials is a big problem. The moment I think, if you're a farm that's getting state or federal subsidies and stuff, yeah, the feds don't like cannabis at the moment. And I can see potential conflicts sitting there, which maybe no one's tapped into yet, but someone with deep pockets or some state legislator or senator may decide to make that an issue if the right person comes along and be like, all of a sudden your state and federal grants just dried up. Where are you at now? I could be wrong. I just want to hypothesize, but I just like with anything else, you know, like the banking aspects and all these other things, there's still those aspects that have to be dealt with. Joe, did you have something?
Yes, how about Bartlett Farms? Remember that the Bartletts proposed a 5,000 square foot facility for growing.
Okay, I'm not even I'm gonna let you digest what I just said a few minutes ago. And think about what I just said. Could be wrong. The only way you're gonna find out is if you want to approach them personally, but I'm giving you a hypothesis on certain elements here that I think
Do
come
you
into
think
play.
do you think Bartlett Farms gets a subsidy of some sort from the federal government? I don't know.
I don't know that for a fact. I do not. But I'm not all right. I'm gonna stop right there. I'm gonna bite my tongue and stop. Okay. Anyways. Anything else? Because I'd really like for Dan to pick back up where he's at.
I'm appreciating discussion, so I will happily yield my time anytime on that. But and just before I move on from social consumption, and this is where to address your concerns, Barry, this was straight out of Will and the election division's mouth as far as the interpretation from of the select board being able to adopt social consumption regulations on their own. So that's confirmed. And he said, anyone I'm working with, feel free to reach out to them. But these social consumption petitions, they're live now. And now I guess the election division too, they've been trained up on all this stuff. So they're able to answer any questions on all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have no doubt they can adopt it. But the thing is right now, these bylaws that are in place have got to be changed.
Yeah.
Because what's going to happen is they'll directly conflict with each other. So like I said, I have no doubt that certain things can begin to happen. And maybe that's where we're into the whole licensure thing where you can dissociate it from an adult recreational facility. But what's currently in place in this bylaw is going to hamstring the whole thing. So, like I said, I would honestly want to see the actual language crafted underneath it to see if there's something that can do it. And certainly there's probably going to come a point where we're going to have to deal with K&P law anyways, and we'll bring that up and see where that goes to as well. Oh, Dan, just one more thing, and I hope you don't mind me bringing this up. He did have an opportunity to meet with John Giorgio, who's
Yes.
yeah, and so he was helpful a little bit with Dan, I think, to look through some of the stuff. I think he brought some things into play that I had not thought of here as well. So that was good to at least get a gauge from that aspect. But go ahead, Dan. I'll let you pick this up from here.
No problem. And I appreciate it. Give my vocal cords a break for a second. But yeah, and that's where I think this is one of the reasons too. I really wanted to bring these all back to the committee too, because I think there are still obviously some questions that need to be answered around this. Barry too, I had originally had this entire line 8 stricken from the definition, but I think that's where, we added this language to just differentiate as well between the licenses. But I think to this point too, and I think, I'll get to the end where we already have a definition for adult on-site marijuana social consumption operator. So that's where if this doesn't pass as well, or whatever, if the town does want to adopt these ordinances, there is power in having these broken up already because they're broken up on the zoning use table. So if you wanted to enact separate zoning for adult on-site marijuana operators, there is, I think probably some more flexibility just from my understanding, but
And just
Yeah.
real quickly, I think as I look at this, I want to visit with Leslie about the 935 CMR 500 because it may ultimately be better to completely strike that.
Yeah.
And that way one, it's like, well, is it prohibited or is it, not prohibited? There may be a cleaner way to deal with this.
I
But anyway,
agree. Thank you.
are you just about through on this page or did you have a few more
Almost.
things?
Yeah, it's really delivery is the next one. And this is where, it's
Yeah.
a can of worms for sure. But this is where, and I guess I'd ask you, Barry, on this one, where, initially this is sort of this line 9 is what dissuaded me from really pursuing the marijuana courier license in the first place. And that's where, from my understanding, even, way back when, this seeing this line, I thought that Nantucket had banned deliveries within the municipality. That was my interpretation. I even was illuminated as to what the actual, what the mechanisms are surrounding delivery. So, and Barry, I think you had brought this up in a previous meeting where you looked at the municipal delivery tracker and you were wondering why Nantucket was on there. So the reason being is any municipality that opted into adult use sales automatically allowed deliveries to be fulfilled within their municipality. So, the only towns or municipalities in the Commonwealth right now that deliveries can't be fulfilled are no towns. So I've had, and this is where I've made this case to a few folks and, I've been waiting, I think, for the right time, so as it stands, someone potentially could fulfill deliveries on the island, right?
Mhm.
I am one where I want to work with the municipalities I'm operating in. Nantucket obviously is very unique, but if you get a marijuana courier license, essentially you can park a compliant vehicle, from what my counsel has told me, in any commercial parking spot across the state, and you can fulfill deliveries for brick and mortar dispensaries. So, I will say, just to address concerns on that too, any local taxes do get remitted to the municipality deliveries are fulfilled in, but and this is where I'm even now, and Monday I bounced that out to Barry. With this definition, I'm not even sure if delivery establishments are explicitly prohibited or if this language was trying to preempt and ban deliveries from being fulfilled on the island while also allowing adult use sales. So I think that's just something to chew on. And I think, I maybe you got a little ahead of myself too when I started reaching out to the town and I saw there were some changes that need to get done. But, as far as I'm aware, delivery licenses may be allowed on the island, but that's something to, if we get rid of line 9, this will allow folks like myself to begin these discussions with the town, to be able to operate. And that's where we'll be, following the bylaws and the permitting processes, et cetera, living up to those expectations. And that's where I really think, getting rid of line 9 would just, and by making all of these changes too, and this brings me to the last one where we're striking the definition of adult on-site marijuana social consumption operator. This just lumps every adult use license type into one definition. It addresses some, buffer zone requirement issues. And really, once you get, it's really just going to clean it up and hopefully streamline it, make it a little easier to point to one section of the town code there. But this is definitely, I want, discussion around this and everything as well. So I'm glad to, bounce this back to everybody. But I think there's work to be done here. And that's where, annual town meeting 24, whatever the success of whatever this iteration may be, we'll see. But I'm in this for the long haul. And, I think that these changes here, they could really just streamline the process, make it a little more coherent for all parties involved. But, that's my 2 cents for sure. And this brings me to the next one, which is the big one, I'd say too, is zoning. But, I'll stop here too if anyone, wants to bounce anything off me before I move to the next slide.
Let's keep going.
Sounds good. So, and this brings me to the last warrant article potentially. And this is where I told Barry from the outset too, and I'm glad that, Barry with his wealth of experience in this field, I'm glad that you are the chair of this committee when it comes to this. This, I initially came at this looking at the CMI and RC2 zones as potential appropriate zones. Barry and Abby, you also clued me in. The RC and RC2 zones are getting phased out. So I removed those. And Barry, I believe the zones that I've added to besides the CMI, they were the zones that there was a consensus around back in 2019, or?
I think our discussion centered on where you could do something on a commercial basis. That it's not just a strictly residential, because that just like the RC2 thing, strictly residential areas, this will not fly. But anything that would give a hint of being able to do some type of commercial establishment was where I wanted to, I think was vital to at least get it in here, just to start working it out. It's easier to have all of this stuff in and then yank certain pieces out. The litmus test here will be to talk with Leslie again to see if these are all the correct targets. But one thing that was very important is no matter what commercial area it can be established in, it all has to default to a special permit, because now all of a sudden the requirements are a lot more onerous. And special permit, which is one of the things I've always liked about it, is that it's not a one and done thing. With a house, you can always go back and revisit it and fine tune a special permit, which I think speaks volumes there. And it certainly, from the public perspective, a special permit for them, they kind of like that more, knowing that 3 years down the road, if everything is going to hell in a handbasket with that commercial entity, they can come back before the planning board and say, we need to have further discussions at this point. And I have a great deal of confidence in how that begins to shake itself out. So I'll turn this back over to you.
That's where I couldn't have said any of this better myself, for sure. And that's where with this as well. And I know this may be, a case to make as far as zoning. And that's where initially, and I'm glad I tweaked this too, I had yes and no, we want to have a special permit, and even as a licensee. And I actually received by right usage for my license type in Salem, I'll say. So, and I'm happy I maybe didn't have to get that special permit, but on Nantucket of all places, I think we know the level of planning and deliberation around any project. We want to have that time to have those discussions. So I am here to be a proponent of that and stand up and say, yes, I want to get in front of the planning board for all this stuff. And I think that's just a way to, promote that responsible industry and that growth and not get too ahead of ourselves. But I was definitely a little more conservative with my approach on the zoning. So I'm glad that, Barry, you were the one to point me towards this stuff. But no, I've done a lot of outreach in that commercial neighborhood and commercial industrial zones, and opening this up. And I did some preliminary outreach now on the GIS map. And the zones that these are, I think that, you probably know better than anyone, they may speak very well to social consumption among other license types. So I'm happy to get this out there. And I have folks on the island who are eager to sponsor all of these articles. And I actually got a thumb up from, I won't even name any names, but I got a thumb up to collect some signatures at a facility on the island, which I think will help expedite this as well. But, I think with all of the mechanisms now, and this is just the logical, I think, growing point in the industry where we get to have these discussions again. And some of them may be more painful than others, I will say, but I think, in a year from now, hopefully we'll all be able to look back on everything that is, coming out with the regulatory changes, and hopefully it'll just make everybody's lives easier. And I think now too, we have neighbors New York, where I'm originally from, rolling out license types. I think every single state but New Hampshire right now that surrounds Massachusetts has adult use regulations in one way or another. And, Massachusetts was the first state to go on the East Coast. And I saw it in my time at my first establishment I worked at. We had those 3.5 hour long lines around the block. And, from there, we definitely have grown quite a bit. And I think Nantucket, I feel it in my bones, and I've told people too, I can't stop if I wanted to, but I really do think that Nantucket of all places can support this industry in a very unique way, and it will only just speak to the culture and character of the island. But I am here for any questions always, and my email's out there, and I want to talk to everybody on this. I'm going to hopefully get back out to the island to, get these printed out once we get some thumbs up and maybe file some more revisions. But yeah, I appreciate the time. And I've told quite a few folks too that the work I've gotten to do here over the last few months, just even as a private citizen, it's some of the most rewarding work I've gotten to do in my professional career. And I'm very happy to hopefully be able to contribute to this, this conversation. So I am looking forward to the next line item on the agenda too, because I think that will answer some questions for me personally, but definitely let me know if you have any questions, and I'm looking forward to all these meetings coming up and to these changes coming down the pike. So thank you for your time sincerely. And thanks for bearing with me in my severely sleep deprived, sleeping in a car state. So thank you very much.
Yeah, it's funny you're right about, I'm here up in Waterville, Maine at the moment for this conference, and I'm just my significant other said, you really need to look at some of these places. I just want to digress for about 15 seconds here. So other potential names that you could use out there are Marijuanaville. That's an actual facility. And then let's see, there's also Bobby Buds. So anyways, and these are all within pretty close proximity to where I'm staying at the moment. But anyways, I just thought that was kind of interesting. My God, there's actually, I don't think we got anything to worry about. There's like almost a dozen facilities within maybe a 20-mile radius of here. But so be it. That's a story for another day. Board members, do you have anything you want to bring up at this point? No. Okay. So with the things that Dan wants to do, I think you can begin to understand that he's going to have to engage in citizen warrant articles to get some of these things that were established many years ago taken care of in one way, shape, form, or another. I would have appreciated the fact that if we were in a different place, that we'd be either partnering with them or doing this on our own, and moving that forward as something from this committee. Like I said, the thing that has skewered the whole thing is twofold. One, the Cannabis Control Commission and the changes they have made, and number two, not really understanding where the town is at in relation to it. But I think once we get some clarity to this, we'll dialogue a little bit further as we get closer to our town meeting and see, kind of where we're at with things prior, hopefully prior to town meeting. It's just there's too many confluences going on at the moment, and other individuals involved in the process, and no matter what we did, from our perspective, it still has to be either either planning board sponsored, or it would have to be through the select board being sponsored if it was going to be a town thing. And like I said, right now that we need to gain some more clarity with that. All right, let me just move on to the last thing, if you're good. I appreciate your time so far. I did send out the final aspect of the social equity policy to Libby at the town administration. She was greatly appreciative of our efforts. It's in the hands of town council now. Apparently, one more time, there's some things that are coming into play that haven't quite settled out yet with the Cannabis Control Commission, and where things are at. So that policy is now kind of back on hold for a little bit, in the hands of town council to be able to figure out how everything's going to come together with the final changes that are going to be established by the Cannabis Control Commission. But for the moment, people are grateful we've fulfilled our part, and it may bounce back to us for further polishing. More to come, and I certainly will keep you in tune with that. But we won't probably know where that's at least until somewhere into November. I don't got much else. Is there anything else any of you want to bring up? Go ahead. I lost your audio there, Dan. Try it again. No.
How about now? Can you hear me now?
That's better. There you go.
There you go. It's yeah, Zoom. You gotta love it. Just some points that came back to me that got brought up earlier. The official regulations that have been promulgated, they have been filed, and there are some changes, I think, from the regulations that are on the agenda here. That was the original draft. There were some changes as far as timelines, and that's where I think some of the timeline we were talking about earlier, that July 1st date, I think that's now March 1st. But over the next 6 months, November 9th is when the regulations will officially be promulgated. There's a sunset period internally from the CCC as far as reviewing host community agreements and things like that, where they're going to be ramping up, and by March 1st, they'll have that internal capacity. And I'll just spill the beans here on my end. That's where, I'm working in a few municipalities, and yeah, it seems like everything's on hold for at least 6 months until the CCC publishes their model HCA and, establishes some of their exactly, what they're looking for. So I am waiting with bated breath myself, but I appreciate the time too. But yeah, I'm hoping that, by town meeting next year, we might see some progress on many fronts. And I appreciate everybody's time sincerely. And, my email's out there. So just bounce me anything. My number too. Barry has my number. Barry, feel free to give it to anybody if anybody wants it, but just thank you. Okay. And I appreciate it.
Thank you. All right. Anything else before us at this juncture? All right. Well, we could hang out and play Monopoly or something, but pending that thought at the moment, I'll gladly accept someone making a motion to adjourn, and we can move along unless you have any other closing comments. Mr. Plantowski.
Adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you. Roll call. Abby.
Aye.
Joe.
Aye.
Jacques. And the chair votes aye. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time. Greatly appreciated.
Thank you. Thanks, Dan.
All right. Thanks, Dan.
Bye now.
Take care.
Yeah,
Bye.
thanks.
Bye-bye.